Emily took a deep breath as she felt the first contractions, more intense than anything she had experienced in the few months of pregnancy. Fear invaded her heart when she realized she was alone at home, with no one to help her at this critical moment. She tried to call her husband David but remembered he was in a complicated surgery and couldn't be disturbed. As the pain increased, she knew she needed to act quickly. Grabbing the car keys with trembling hands, Emily drove to the hospital where David worked and was also the director. During the drive, worry and pain mixed in her chest, but the familiarity of the hospital, where she also worked as a doctor, brought a glimpse of comfort. Upon arriving, she was greeted with expressions of joy mixed with concern. The staff, who knew her well, promptly took her to the delivery room. "Emily, we are here with you," said one of the nurses, holding her hand while guiding her. Inside the delivery room, her friends and colleagues tried to keep Emily calm and safe. Hours passed, heavy with tension and hope. The medical team worked tirelessly, but despite all efforts, the baby did not survive. The silence that followed the announcement of the loss was deafening, only interrupted by Emily's sobs. This was the third time Emily had gone through this pain, each loss reopening old wounds. She already had an 8-year-old son from her first marriage who was waiting for her at home, but since she married David, she hadn't been able to carry a pregnancy to term. Sadness enveloped her like a heavy cloak as she cried in the hospital bed. Hours later, David finally appeared. The fatigue marked his face, evidence of hours in a tense and complicated surgery. He stood at the door, his expression contained. "Emily, how are you?" David asked, his neutral voice contrasting with the emotional chaos Emily was facing. I'm fine," she lied, wiping away her tears and trying to compose a more serene expression. "You can go back to work, I'll be fine." David nodded, still maintaining emotional distance. "If you need anything, the nurses are here. I need to check on some patients, but I'll come back later to see how you are." As soon as he left, Emily was alone with her thoughts. The silence of the room seemed more oppressive than ever. The pain of the loss was immense, but there was also a feeling of isolation, of distance, not just physical but emotional from David. She reflected on her marriage, on the expectations and realities, on the support she needed, and that seemed so absent at that moment. For hours, Emily lay there, staring at the white hospital ceiling, lost in thoughts and memories. The physical pain of the loss mixed with the emotional pain, and she wondered about the future, about her relationship with David, and about how to find the strength to continue, not just for herself but for her son who was waiting for her at home. Finally, the shift changed, and a new nurse entered, a friend who offered not only medical care but a listening ear. Emily shared her feelings, talking about her frustrations and her sadness, finding some relief in the act of talking. It was a small step, but important to start healing the invisible wounds that afflicted her so much. When Emily left the hospital that gloomy afternoon, the cloudy sky seemed to reflect her state of mind. The weight of the loss was still fresh, and she felt each step as if carrying a burden. Upon arriving home, the sight of Kaio, her 8-year-old son, waiting for her at the door offered a small consolation. The nanny, seeing Emily, hurried to meet her, whispering words of comfort before saying goodbye. "Mom, are you okay?" Kaio asked with innocent concern, extending his arms for a hug. "I'm fine now, my love," Emily replied, hugging him tightly, trying to find some relief in her son's presence. The warmth of Kaio's hug brought a slight calm to her agitated heart. Hours later, David arrived home. His appearance was one of exhaustion, the lines on his face deeper than usual. Emily noticed how worn out he seemed, not just physically but emotionally. "Are you okay, Emily?" David asked, maintaining a cautious distance. "I'm trying," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the pain she felt. "And you?" David just nodded, avoiding eye contact. "I'm going to rest a bit," he said, heading up the stairs to their room without waiting for a response. In the days that followed, Emily struggled to find some sense in her routine. The house seemed quieter than ever, and interactions with David became brief and superficial. He was clearly sad about the loss, but Emily couldn't help but feel there was something more, a weariness of her that he seemed to carry. Determined to regain some control over her life, Emily decided to return to work. As she entered the hospital where she had built her career, she was met with looks of pity and sadness from her colleagues, which made her feel even more vulnerable. "Good morning, Emily," said one of the receptionists in a soft voice, avoiding direct eye contact. "Good morning," Emily replied, trying to maintain composure as she headed to the time clock. However, her attempt to clock in failed. Confused, she tried again, but her fingerprint was not recognized. "Is there a problem with the system today?" she asked one of the technicians passing by. "You'd better go to HR, Emily. They can explain better," he said, clearly uncomfortable. In HR, the atmosphere was equally tense. The department manager, a woman with whom Emily had always had a good relationship, greeted her with a somber expression. "Emily, please sit down. We have something important to discuss," said the manager, indicating the chair in front of her desk. "What's going on?" Emily asked, feeling a growing anxiety. "We received a resignation request in your name," the manager began hesitantly. "It was submitted by Dr. David." The shock was palpable. "David, my husband? But he never mentioned anything." "I'm really sorry, Emily. All I know is that the request came from him and—" Emily stood up abruptly, confusion giving way to frustration. "Thank you, I need to go." Returning home, Emily was inundated with a whirlwind of emotions. What was David thinking? Why would he do something like this without even discussing it with me? Each step towards the house increased her anxiety. She needed answers, and needed them now. As soon as David arrived, they would have to have a serious conversation about everything that was happening. When David entered the house that night, the atmosphere was already charged with tension. Emily, with a mix of confusion and resentment evident in her eyes, wasted no time. "David, why did you fire me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of uncertainty and pain. David, avoiding her gaze, sighed deeply before answering. "I'm tired, Emily. Tired of our marriage, tired of everything." Emily, feeling the shock of these words, pressed further. "That's no justification for firing me. That's not how things should be done." He looked at the floor and then, with a voice that mixed frustration and disdain, revealed more. "You can't give me a child, Emily. It's always the same thing, one loss after another." The words hit her like a blow, leaving her momentarily breathless. "How can you say something like that?" Emily was shocked. Each of his words cut like a knife. Pressing her lips into a thin line, David finally revealed the real reason behind his decision. "After you lost the second baby, I went out with some friends and met another woman," he confessed, avoiding Emily's furious gaze. "She's 4 months pregnant now." Emily's world seemed to spin. Each of David's words was a stab to her heart. "You did this because you wanted to have a child?" Her voice barely concealed the pain. David shrugged, his coldness cutting. "I want a child, Emily. And it's clear you can't give me that." The cruelty of his words left her stunned. They began to argue heatedly. David, in an increasingly bitter tone, blamed her for the losses they had suffered. "You're like a barren field, Emily. A field that doesn't bear fruit," he mocked cruelly. "There's nothing to do but move to other lands. And that's exactly what I'm doing." David's words were like blades, each one cutting deeper. Emily could hardly believe the man revealing himself before her eyes. He ended with a cold ultimatum. "I fired you because you would disrupt the environment at the hospital, and I want you to leave the house. I'm bringing her here." Consumed by anger and betrayal, Emily turned and went up the stairs to their bedroom. Tears of rage and disgust streamed down her face as she walked, each step echoing the sound of a world falling apart. In the bedroom, loneliness enveloped her like a cloak. She sat on the bed, her hands trembling, trying to understand the extent of the betrayal. The house that was once a home now felt like a cage, each memory a reminder of the love she thought she had. With her eyes fixed on the window, watching the night fall, Emily knew the decisions she needed to make wouldn't be easy. But one thing was clear: this was no longer the home she knew, and the man she married was no longer the same. With the bags packed and her son by her side, Emily paused for a moment at the threshold of the door. The house, now devoid of happy memories, seemed to echo the coldness of David's words. Kaio, sensing his mother's hesitation, held her hand tighter. Emily shook her head, pushing away the tumultuous thoughts, and decided on the next step. She knew her options were limited. With few relatives, and no home of her own to go to, Emily picked up her cell phone with trembling hands and dialed the number of a distant aunt, Matilda, who lived in the same city. The call was tense initially, but upon explaining her situation, Matilda did not hesitate. "Emily, dear, come over. You and Kaio can stay as long as you need." Matilda's voice was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the coldness Emily felt inside. Upon arriving at Matilda's house, Emily and Kaio were greeted with open arms. "You are always welcome here," Matilda affirmed, embracing them. Matilda's husband and their 4 children waved, their friendly expressions bringing a slight comfort to Emily. The house was small, clearly not designed for so many people. While thanking Matilda for the hospitality, Emily knew this couldn't be a long-term solution. She needed to find a job and a place for them to live. In the following days, Emily began looking for a job in other hospitals. Her resume was impressive: a doctor with years of experience and a history of excellence. However, every interview she had, every resume she sent, ended in rejection. She couldn't understand. Her career had been impeccable. "It doesn't make sense," she murmured as she reviewed the rejection emails. One day, while Kaio played in Matilda's small backyard, Emily sat with her aunt in the kitchen, drinking coffee. "I just don't understand, Aunt. Something is not right. I'm qualified, I have experience." Matilda looked at her with sympathy but with a hint of concern. "Emily, do you think David could be behind this?" The question made Emily pause. "David? But why? Isn't it enough that he expelled me from the house and fired me?" "Some people do unimaginable things when they want to hurt someone," Matilda replied, sadness touching her voice. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The stay at Matilda's house became increasingly difficult, not due to a lack of hospitality, but the clear need for more space and privacy for everyone. Emily continued her fruitless job search, each rejection more discouraging than the last. One day, after yet another frustrating interview, Emily sat on a park bench near the hospital that had refused her application. Matilda's words echoed in her mind. Could David really be sabotaging her career? She picked up her cell phone and called an old friend who worked in hospital administration. Marcos, can I ask you something? Do you know if there's something strange going on with my applications? Something behind the scenes? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Emily, I shouldn't tell you this, but David has been talking to several hospitals. He has a lot of influence. The confirmation fell like a bomb. Tears of frustration welled up in Emily's eyes. David's cruelty knew no bounds. He was determined to see her fail and distanced from everything she knew and loved. Feeling the weight of these revelations, Emily knew she needed to take drastic measures, not just for herself but for Caio, who deserved a stable and happy life, away from David's toxic shadow. With renewed determination, she began planning her next step, knowing the fight would be arduous but essential to rebuild her life and protect her son. In the warmth of Matilda's small kitchen, Emily spoke about the inheritance she had received years ago, a house in the countryside, left by a grandfather she barely knew. Matilda, listening attentively while preparing a last cup of coffee for Emily, couldn't hide her surprise. This sounds like the perfect opportunity for you to start over, away from all this, Matilda said, running her hand through Caio's hair, who was playing beside the table. Yes, I only saw him once, on the day of my baptism. I don't even remember him, but he thought of me. I received this house, but never went to see it and had almost forgotten about it. But in this moment of need, I think it will be useful, Emily smiled sadly, recalling the document confirming the inheritance. At least it's a place to go now. After emotional goodbyes, with promises of visits and frequent phone calls, Emily and Caio took their bags and headed to the bus station. The whole day of travel was a blur of alternating landscapes and brief stops, with most passengers getting off before them. Upon disembarking, the station was almost empty. Emily held Caio's hand tightly, her mind racing with the magnitude of the change they were about to make. The bus driver, when asked about the address, merely shrugged, clearly unfamiliar with the area. Emily's worry grew as she unsuccessfully tried to locate the address on her cell phone with a weak signal. Then, she spotted a passing taxi. She waved, and the vehicle stopped beside them. Please, do you know where Acacia Street is? Supposedly where the house I inherited from my grandfather is, Emily explained to the driver while placing the bags in the trunk. Acacia Street is a bit far from here, but I'll take you there. Don't worry, the taxi driver replied with a smile, starting the journey. As the taxi traveled through the unfamiliar streets, Emily looked outside, trying to imagine what her new life would be like. Caio, beside her, seemed absorbed by the novelty, his eyes fixed on the window, observing every detail. You seem worried, the taxi driver observed through the rearview mirror. I am a little, Emily admitted. It's all so new, and I don't know what to expect. Besides, I'm trying to escape a complicated situation with my ex-husband. Sometimes, a new beginning is exactly what we need, the taxi driver murmured more to himself. And Acacia Street is a nice area, quiet and friendly. I think you'll like it. Emily tried to reassure herself with his words. I hope so. We're ready for a change. Emily's cell phone, resting on her lap, flashed a low battery message before turning off completely, leaving them even more isolated. She looked at the driver, who seemed confident in the path he was taking. It's near my house, actually. If you need anything once you settle in, I'm around, he added, as if reading her anxiety. Thank you, Emily replied, feeling a hint of hope. She squeezed Caio's hand, who now dozed off beside her, watching the shadows lengthen with the approaching dusk. Emily felt the weight of the past days begin to dissipate. The road ahead was still uncertain, but in that taxi, moving towards a new destination, she allowed herself to believe that better days would come. Gabriel, the taxi driver, seemed close to Emily's age and introduced himself with ease, quickly putting Emily at ease during the trip. He was communicative, talking about the town and his favorite places, a conversation Emily found comforting given the tumultuous situation she was escaping from. However, the tranquility was broken when Gabriel's cell phone rang. He answered immediately, and his expression changed drastically. The worry was evident as he spoke quickly. "Sorry, I really need to take this," Gabriel said, diverting his gaze from the road for a moment to look at Emily through the rearview mirror. "Is everything okay?" Emily asked, her anxiety increasing as she noticed Gabriel's abrupt change in behavior. "My nephew, he had an accident. I need to get to him now," Gabriel explained, his voice tense, as he sped up the car and changed route. Emily nodded, her doctor instinct replacing any other anxiety. "Of course, do what you need to do." Gabriel drove quickly to a small house in the suburbs of the town, parking hastily. He ran inside, leaving the door open behind him. Emily, following her medical instinct, didn't hesitate to get out of the car and enter the house after him. Inside, she found Gabriel beside a boy who looked about 13 years old, lying on the floor with a pained expression. "My name is Emily, I'm a doctor," she introduced herself quickly, kneeling beside the boy. "What's your name?" "Felipe," the boy murmured, trying to stay calm despite the evident pain. "What happened, Felipe?" Emily asked, keeping her voice as gentle as possible to avoid alarming him further. "I climbed a ladder to get my ball, but it wobbled and I fell," Felipe explained, his breathing irregular. Emily carefully examined him, noticing the difficulty with which he breathed and the area he held his side, indicative of a possible rib fracture. "It looks like you may have broken some ribs. This isn't extremely serious, but we need to take you to the hospital to confirm and treat it." "Should we call an ambulance?" Gabriel asked, looking anxiously at Emily. She pondered for a moment, remembering Gabriel's words about the usual delay of ambulances. "I think it will be faster if we go by taxi, especially if the hospital is close." Gabriel nodded, and together, with great care, they helped Felipe to his feet and supported him to the taxi. Gabriel drove as smoothly as possible given the circumstances, and in a few minutes, they arrived at the hospital. Medical teams were already waiting at the entrance of the emergency room and quickly took charge of Felipe, leading him inside for evaluation and treatment. Emily followed, her heart still racing with the urgency of the situation, but as soon as she entered the hospital, a detail at the entrance made her stop. She looked at the address displayed above the entrance and then at the paper in her purse. It was the same address as the house she had inherited. A sense of surrealism enveloped her. "What's happening?" she murmured to herself. Upon arriving at the hospital, Emily immediately took charge as a doctor, prioritizing her medical role above all else. She followed Felipe into the emergency room, where a team of doctors quickly attended to him. After a series of examinations and x-rays, the responsible doctor approached with good news. Felipe broke a rib, but fortunately, it's nothing serious. He should fully recover in a few weeks, the doctor, a middle-aged man with a reassuring expression, informed them. Relieved, Emily thanked the doctors and left to find Gabriel, who was anxiously waiting in the hallway. Upon seeing her, he jumped up, his eyes searching for any sign of what had happened. "How is he?" Gabriel asked quickly, his concern evident in his voice. "He's fine, Gabriel. He broke a rib, but he'll be okay," Emily replied, offering a reassuring smile. Gabriel sighed in relief and collapsed back into the chair. "Thank God," he murmured, running his hands over his face. "I don't know what I would do if something more serious had happened. I've been raising Felipe like he's my own son since my sister." Gabriel's voice faltered, the memory of his sister still a raw wound. "He's lucky to have you," Emily said, sitting beside him. "And it seems I was lucky to have you around today as well." Gabriel laughed, but soon became serious again. "And about the hospital? You said we were at your house?" Emily nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "It's a long story, but I'm going to talk to the administration right now to understand what's happening." Leaving Gabriel in the waiting room, Emily headed to the administration office. She was greeted by a secretary who, after hearing her story, promptly called the administrator. The man, with graying hair and reading glasses, listened attentively as Emily explained the situation and showed the documents proving her inheritance. "Let me take a closer look at this," he said, examining the papers carefully. After a few minutes, he looked up, a mix of surprise and consternation in his eyes. "It seems there really was a mistake. Your grandfather was an exceptionally good and charitable man. He transformed his original property into a center to help those in need, which eventually evolved into this community hospital." Emily listened intently, feeling a mixture of pride and perplexity. "So how did this end up in the government's hands?" "After your grandfather's death, the government stepped in to keep the service running, given its value to the community. There must have been some confusion in the records after this transition," the administrator explained, flipping through some other documents on his desk. "And now, what happens?" Emily asked, the reality of her situation starting to set in. "I'll have to consult our lawyers and see how we can correct this mistake. It may be a complicated process, but we'll do what's necessary to resolve it," he promised, a tone of determination in his voice. "Thank you. I really appreciate it," Emily said, still trying to process everything. She stood up, extending her hand to the administrator, who shook it firmly. Returning to the waiting room, Emily found Gabriel playing with a small toy car with Felipe, who had been released from the emergency room and now had a large bandage. Seeing Emily, Felipe smiled. "Dr. Emily, are you going to stay here now that it's your house?" he asked with the innocent curiosity of a child. The tension of the day finally began to dissipate. "It seems so, Felipe, it seems so," Emily replied, smiling. While the details still needed to be resolved and the confusion over her grandfather's legacy hung in the air, Emily felt an inexplicable connection to the place. Perhaps it was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would honor her grandfather's memory and legacy in a way she never imagined. That afternoon, as Emily and Kaio made their way back to the taxi that had brought them, a hurried voice intercepted them. It was the hospital administrator, coming to meet them with an unexpected offer. "Emily, I was thinking. If you need, we have a space here at the hospital intended for visitors. It's almost always empty and would be much more comfortable for you than staying in a hospital room," the administrator explained, his tone suggesting both a practical solution and an offer of comfort. Emily hesitated for a moment, looking at Kaio, who seemed tired from the turmoil of the past days. "I really appreciate it. That would be very helpful at the moment," she replied, relieved by the offer that alleviated an immediate concern. Gabriel, who had been accompanying them, smiled and said goodbye. "If you need anything, I'm around." "Take care," he said, walking away. Guided by the administrator, Emily and Kaio were taken to the visitor area of the hospital, a quiet space with several neatly arranged beds ready for use. The area was silent, with only a few people passing by occasionally. Emily and Kaio settled in, trying to find some comfort in such an unusual situation. As the hours passed, she reflected on the unexpected events that had led them to this place, immersed in her thoughts. When Gabriel reappeared, knocking gently on the door before entering. "Hi, I just wanted to see how you're settling in," Gabriel said, his face expressing genuine concern. "We're fine, thank you, Gabriel," Emily replied, forcing a smile. "And how's Felipe?" "He's recovering well, thankfully," Gabriel informed, his relief evident. Emily nodded, glad for the news. "I'm just waiting for a response from the lawyers now. It's all a bit uncertain." Gabriel, sensing the loneliness in Emily's words, changed the subject. "By the way, there's a festival in town tonight. I thought maybe you'd like to go to relax a bit." Surprised, Emily considered the idea. "You know, that sounds like a great idea. We'd love to." That night, the group, Emily, Kaio, Gabriel, and Felipe, went to the festival. The moonlight bathed the event with a soft glow, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Colorful stalls, live music, and laughter filled the air, offering Emily a night of fun and distraction she hadn't experienced in a long time. Kaio and Felipe quickly bonded, running between the stalls and games, while Emily and Gabriel walked a little behind, talking and laughing. For a moment, Emily could forget the complications of her situation and just enjoy the company. When the night came to an end, Gabriel drove them back to the hospital. On the way, he made an unexpected offer. "You know, we have plenty of space at my house, a large area where you could stay comfortably." "It must be strange to live in a hospital," he commented, a half-smile on his face. Emily laughed, recognizing the strangeness of her current situation. "Yeah, it's a bit strange," she admitted. "But for now, I think we'll stay at the hospital." "Thank you very much for the offer, Gabriel. It's really kind of you." Gabriel nodded, understanding. "Well, the offer stands. Anything you need, just let me know." As they said goodbye at the hospital entrance, Emily felt a mix of gratitude and melancholy. That night had been a precious reminder that, despite the unusual circumstances, there were moments of light and joy to be found and people willing to help. And, as she returned to the visitor area with Kaio asleep on her shoulder, she knew that for now, this strange hospital was where they needed to be. On the 6th day of Emily's unexpected stay at the hospital, a sudden wave of urgency swept through the environment. The sounds of hurried footsteps and quick communications between staff echoed through the corridors. Intrigued and concerned, Emily left the small space serving as her temporary refuge and headed to the main hospital area, where the commotion seemed concentrated. Upon arriving, she saw doctors and nurses rushing back and forth, clearly overwhelmed. Approaching one of the nurses who seemed a bit less busy, Emily asked what was happening. The nurse, panting, quickly replied, "There was a major accident involving 2 buses on the highway. Many injured, but thankfully no fatalities. We're trying to handle the situation as best we can." As a doctor, Emily immediately felt the need to help. "Do you need more hands?" "I'm a doctor, though I'm not registered as staff here," she offered, ready to do whatever she could. Before the nurse could respond, the administrator, who had noticed the interaction, quickly approached Emily. "Dr. Emily, I understand you're a doctor. We desperately need help. Could you assist with the injured arriving?" Without hesitation, Emily nodded. "Of course, show me where I need to be." Guided by the administrator, she was directed to a hallway where victims of the accident were starting to arrive, some on stretchers, others supported by family or friends. Emily rolled up her sleeves and began attending to each case with the efficiency and calm that the situation demanded. She assessed injuries, stabilized patients, and advised the less seriously injured on necessary care. Her training and medical instincts had never been so tested. For several hours, Emily worked tirelessly, moving from one patient to another, barely noticing the passage of time. Only when the last patients were attended to, and the emergency flow finally diminished, already in the early hours of the morning, did she allow herself to feel the weight of exhaustion. Exhausted, she found a quiet corner and sat down, closing her eyes for a moment. It didn't take long for the administrator to approach her, gratitude evident on his face. "Dr. Emily, I don't know how to thank you for your tireless effort today. You were essential," he said sincerely. Emily smiled, appreciating the recognition but feeling every muscle in her body protesting the effort. "I'm just happy to help," she replied. The administrator, observing her with a mixture of admiration and consideration, continued, "This brings me to a proposal. I saw how you handled the situation today, and we'd like to have you with us here as part of our team. If you're interested, I'd like to formalize your hiring." Surprised but excited at the prospect of regularly practicing medicine again and in such a meaningful context, Emily didn't hesitate. "I would love that. It would be amazing," she replied, the exhaustion giving way to a new wave of enthusiasm for the opportunity. "Great. I'll take care of the paperwork first thing tomorrow. Now, please, go rest. You deserve it," he said with a smile. With a lighter heart and feeling useful again, Emily returned to her temporary accommodation at the hospital, now with a sense of belonging and purpose. As she prepared for sleep, she reflected on how such a random and adversity-filled situation had led to an unexpected opportunity for a fresh start and professional reaffirmation. Life, she thought, truly had a strange and wonderful way of finding order in chaos. Since starting to work at the hospital, Emily found a way to keep her mind busy and away from the complications of her personal life. The routine was exhausting but rewarding, and she felt she was finally doing something useful with her time, something that truly mattered. About a month after starting work, while reviewing some medical records, she was informed by the receptionist that lawyers were waiting to speak with her in one of the hospital's conference rooms. Curious and a bit anxious, she followed to the designated meeting place. The lawyers, 2 men in impeccable suits, stood as she entered. After formal introductions, one of them, Mr. Martins, took the lead in explaining the purpose of the visit. "Dr. Emily, after a month of negotiations and legal reviews, we have important news about the property your grandfather left," Mr. Martins began, opening his briefcase and taking out some documents. "We have confirmed that you are the legitimate heir to the land where the hospital is located, and the government has agreed to compensate you for the improper use of the property." The other lawyer, Mr. Lopez, continued, "The compensation amount is quite significant, considering the size and location of the land." Upon hearing the sum, Emily felt her heart race, shocked not only by the exorbitant amount but also by the sudden range of possibilities it opened up for her. The money was enough to completely transform her life and Kaio's. After the meeting with the lawyers, Emily decided it was time to change her living situation. She rented a cozy house in the town, providing herself and Kaio with a more stable and comfortable environment. To celebrate the new house, Emily invited Gabriel and Felipe for the inauguration. The friendship between Emily and Gabriel had grown considerably. He was a constant support and a loyal friend. However, Emily knew she wasn't ready for a romantic relationship. They agreed to maintain the friendship they had. A few months later, when Emily was well settled and adjusted to her new life, she received a completely unexpected visit. It was David, accompanied by his lover and a lawyer. Emily, who had kept so busy that she had almost forgotten the painful breakup with David, was taken by surprise. "David, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to stay calm while leading them to the living room. "I came for you to sign the divorce papers. I want to resolve this once and for all," David replied, his voice firm. Although reluctant to have any interaction with him, Emily quickly agreed to sign the papers, wishing to sever any remaining ties between them. While discussing the terms and proceeding with the signatures, David's lover began to writhe in pain. I think I'm going into labor," she moaned, holding her belly. Immediately, the doctor and Emily took charge. She guided the woman to the couch, giving clear and calm instructions. "Breathe deeply. I'm going to help you." "David, call an ambulance, now," Emily ordered, while preparing the environment to assist in the birth if necessary. The situation was ironic and tense. David, visibly shaken and clumsy, ran to make the call while Emily, the ex-wife, prepared to help his lover during labor. The living room of her new house had turned into an improvised emergency room, a scenario Emily could never have imagined a few months ago. "We can't wait for the ambulance. It's taking too long. I will need to deliver the baby right now," Emily announced, quickly organizing the space around to create an improvised birthing area. David and his lover exchanged nervous glances as Emily gave instructions, preparing for the birth. Moments later, with the skill and confidence of someone who had faced high-pressure situations before, Emily helped bring a baby boy into the world. The child cried loudly immediately, a sound that usually brought relief and joy, but in this case triggered a new storm. When David took the boy in his arms, his face changed from worry to shock and then to anger. "This child is not mine," he shouted, looking at the baby with clearly Asian features, so different from his and his lover's. The woman, exhausted and emotional, tried to explain. "I can explain, David, please, you need to understand." But David, caught up in the heat of the moment, interrupted. "You went out with that colleague of yours, didn't you? I always suspected it. The child is the spitting image of him." The accusations flew as Emily, still stunned by the rapid succession of events, tried to remain calm. The arrival of the ambulance, finally sounding outside, offered her a way out of the escalating tension. "You need to resolve this elsewhere. Please take this discussion outside," Emily intervened, pointing to the door. Her voice carried an authority that allowed no contestation. David, holding the baby and his lover, still trying to recover from the birth and the revelation, slowly walked to the ambulance, leaving Emily alone in her now disordered living room. Despite everything, a slight smile touched Emily's lips as she closed the door behind them. It wasn't joy at David's misfortune, but an ironic acknowledgement of the twists life could take. Years later, Emily's life had taken a decidedly happier and calmer turn. A new festival enlivened the town, bringing with it the promise of a day of fun and relaxation. Felipe and Caio, now firm friends, ran around the rides, filling the air with their laughter. Gabriel, who over time had become much more than a friend to Emily, was buying a candy apple for her. Emily, holding her 6-month-old son she had with Gabriel in her arms, watched the scene with a heart full of love and gratitude. Life, with all its twists and surprises, had brought many challenges to Emily, but now, surrounded by her new family, she felt truly at home. Amid the festival's bustle, with the evening light painting everything in golden tones, Emily felt deeply grateful. Here, with Gabriel and her children, was where she belonged. It was where she had found love and redemption. What did you think of the story? Don't forget to comment, like, and share the channel. See you next time.